Well, another school shooting, and this one left 19 children and two teachers dead. Did the warning signs go unheeded, or were they never reported? This deadly tragedy has been repeated over and again for the last 23 years. What really happened in Uvalde, Texas at the Robb Elementary School? Hello, everybody, and welcome to Profiling Evil Reacts. I decided to skip this week's crime report to spend a little more time on the Robb Elementary School massacre. I hope you'll go over to the content section here at Profiling Evil and watch my live with four amazing retired cops who understand this problem. Together, we explored the case from a number of different angles, and I think you'll learn a lot by watching it. And I hope you'll take a moment and hit that like and subscribe button. And make sure you ring the bell so that you get all of our videos here on Profiling Evil. And folks, please consider joining our channel memberships. And while you're at it, go to profilingevil.com and sign up for our free digital newsletter. It's called the B.O.L.O. Now, let's explore the timeline in this terrible mass murder. This thing all unfolded around 60 miles north of the Mexican border, some 85 miles west of San Antonio, Texas. It's in a little town called Uvalde. Now, there's only about 16,000 people in the town. They're mostly Hispanic, and about 80% of those people, the student population in particular, come from struggling, if not outright poor families. This murder occurred on May 24th, 2022, but I wanted to start our story about 2 months earlier. So, by doing this, we'll begin to explore this suspectology. We're going to learn who the suspect in this case is. Now, this soon to be killer is a guy named Salvador Rolando Ramos, an 18-year-old kid who didn't have a criminal history. He wasn't a person with a documented health issue, but he was far from perfect. His classmates, a few friends, and the media have uncovered that Ramos was bullied at school. Now, it might be Ramos. I've heard it said both ways. Often, he was bullied because he had a stutter and a strong lisp. He was reported to be in a number of fights at school, but he was on track until last year to graduate from high school this week. But those graduation plans were doused as he started missing more and more school, eventually dropping out. Now, he lived in a single parent home, and there are reports that suggest that his home life was equally troubled, less than ideal. Perhaps another indicator of the many problems this kid was facing. But like many young people, he was also glued to his mobile device. I got mine right here. He spent a great deal of time on social media platforms where he regularly posted things that frankly were troubling to other people. Media reports suggest that his acquaintances said that he was openly abusing animals, that he would actually live stream the abuse of these animals on social media. Now, I'm wondering why somebody in social media didn't pick up on that. I know that my videos are watched carefully, they're reviewed, and they're challenged. Ramos made terrifying threats to people online, especially to girls who he threatened to kidnap and sexually assault. Now, there are accounts where Ramos actually threatened to commit a school shooting as well. It was uncovered in a Washington Post article that reported that one teen actually reported Ramos to social media platforms that he was posting on, where he was making these threats. But according to the article, nothing came of it. And I think that social media outlet's going to have some splaining to do on this one. Ramos worked at a fast food restaurant for about a year before the shooting, and many of his coworkers teased this kid nonstop, including calling him school shooter. Now, this is really significant to me, and I wonder why anybody is using that terminology to label someone. Was it his behavior? Was it things that he was saying? Bottom line is, You don't come up with a title like that and call somebody that without them saying some things that should really be raising red flags. I'm wondering why his behavior was either brushed off or just not reported. I found a photograph online of Ramos, and it sent this, well, frankly, it sent a shudder down my spine as I thought how similar Ramos looked to a photo I recalled of serial killer Richard Ramirez. You might remember some of my interviews with him and discussions that I've had online. If not, go back and watch my videos of meeting with Richard and talking about his murders. But pay close attention to how closely Ramos looks to Ramirez at least one particular time in his life. Now, a year before the shooting, Ramos starts posting pictures of automatic rifles on his social media account. And at about the same time, a former friend says he was driving around town at night with another kid, shooting at strangers with his BB gun. And he was out committing a lot of other criminal mischief acts. Well, word on the street is that he even tried to get his sister to buy a weapon for him, but thankfully she refused. Well, now we're about a month before the shooting, and Ramos has moved out of his mother's house and into his grandparents' house. This happens about the time Ramos live streams an abusive argument that he's having with his mother. I mean, he is being abusive in verbal ways. On May 14th, Ramos sends out a private social media message that reads, quote, 10 more days, close quote. What would you think? When a person asks him about it, he says, quote, asking Ramos, hey, are you going to shoot up a school or something? Well, Ramos replies, no, stop asking dumb questions. You'll see. Again, was he sending out little trial balloons to say what his plans were? Well, Ramos turned 18 on May 16th, 2022. And the next day, the very next day, he went out and he legally purchased a Smith & Wesson semi-automatic rifle from a local gun store. He waits about 3 days and he goes online and he purchases another AR style semi-automatic rifle, gets that thing shipped to him. And he immediately starts posting the weapons and the receipts on social media accounts. This is all happening at the same time this kid is purchasing nearly 1,700 rounds of ammunition. Well, now it appears like Ramos's motor is really starting to get going. I mean, he is really ramping up. Things are accelerating. He must have fantasized about this moment for a really long time. And now he's feeling like the fantasy just isn't enough. And it's time to start acting out the fantasy. So let's fast forward to the morning of May 24th, 2022. This is the morning of the shooting at Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas. It's somewhere around 11 a.m. Now, Ramos has made a friend with a girl in Germany and he's texting her online. It's 11 o'clock for him. It's 6 o'clock in Germany where she's living. At 6:01 p.m. in Germany, that's 11:01 in Texas. And that's the time I'm going to use going forward. And you'll see a different time in the text messages, but just keep in mind those are on her phone and those are showing time in Germany. But at 11:01 a.m., he's starting a text message string. He comments that he's angry with his grandmother, who's on the phone at that particular moment with a mobile phone carrier, complaining about his bill and talking through things. Now, 20 minutes pass, and during this time, there's some texting back and forth. But at 11:21 Texas time, Ramos texts his friend in Germany and says, I'm really getting annoyed with this thing. And then he says, quote, I just shot my grandma in her head. I'm a go shoot up an elementary school, RN, close quote. Now, RN, if you're not real tech savvy, means right now. Now, here we can theorize that it's at this point that Ramos, pumped up on adrenaline, runs out the door and jumps in the car. But I want to now kind of change locations a little bit because, unbeknownst to him or anyone else in this picture, over at the Robb Elementary School, an elementary school teacher is propping open an outside door so that she can go out to her car and get some things. This is happening at 11:27 a.m. and this is something we know because it was verified by CCTV footage. Now, with this all in mind, we can theorize that Ramos leaves the home after he gets the keys and he gets into his grandparents' truck and he starts his trip toward Robb Elementary School. Now, from everything that we've learned, he's been, again, planning this out in his mind for some time. I went in and mapped out some of the locations of Ramos's grandmother's house, the school, the funeral home, some other key places in here. And I wanted to look at these three potential routes that he might have traveled to make his way over to the school. Now, I haven't seen any forensic evidence in this case, so I'm only theorizing on these routes. But it seems like he only had really three choices. So we're going to talk about those. The first would be that he exits the house and he goes west on Juarez Street. He turns south on Evans Street and travels south for a couple of blocks before turning left again to go eastbound on Geraldine toward the school. Now, all of the routing applications, when you put in the home of his grandmother and the location of the school, suggest that this is the most probable route that he would drive. And I don't know that it matters much, but I think we have to consider that this kid could have taken a different direction getting over there. He may have headed east on Juarez when he left the home. Then he's got really two choices. The first would be to turn south onto Nickel Street. Then he would travel southbound and have to turn east onto Geraldine to make his way over to the school. Or he goes all the way east on Juarez from his grandmother's house, and then he turns southbound on Grove Street. Now, if he did this, it would have forced him to make a really hard left-hand turn to go eastbound onto Geraldine Street. I'm kind of leaning that this is the direction that he probably took because what we do know is that he crashes into this irrigation ditch near Geraldine and Grove Street. Now, this is an inexperienced driver. And in my opinion, he is so hyper focused on that school and fulfilling his fantasy of causing a mass murder that he's got tunnel vision. I mean, everything's closing in on him. Can you imagine how his adrenaline must have been pumping after committing what he thought was a homicide with his grandmother and finally getting into a position where he's really acting out his fantasy of shooting up a school? Well, what he didn't plan for was the accident that occurred at 11:28 a.m. Now you remember that school teacher propped the door open at 11:27. What are the chances? Now this accident may prove to be one of those things that disrupts his otherwise well-laid plan. The images of the truck crashed into the irrigation ditch suggest that the event was flat out an accident, not him trying to get into the ditch for some reason. I mean, there's rails along the road to protect vehicles from going into the ditch. And as we look at this imagery, you can see it would have taken a little bit of effort to get through those rails and down into the bottom of that ditch. Now, I'm hopeful that the police department's conducted a thorough analysis of the accident scene and they've examined the points of impact, the scuff marks on the roads, the skid marks, the debris, all of that to determine the vehicle's speed, the vehicle's direction, when it lost control, if tires were inflated or deflated. And again, maybe it doesn't matter, but here's why I'm thinking this is so interesting. The accident was violent enough to break both the front and rear wheel off of the driver's side of the truck. Now, I'm theorizing here, but I believe it would have also deployed the airbag in the truck if it's working. And that perhaps was disorienting for Ramos. I mean, you hear people talk about those airbags going off. Some of you probably have experienced that yourself. I mean, there have been reports of it causing abrasions, even breaking bones. It is intended to stop you from going through the windshield and through the steering wheel. Well, it may have been that the driver's door was also rendered inoperative, because what we can tell and what we know is that two witnesses heard the collision and exited the funeral home that's across the street a little bit to the northeast. They walked out to check out what the collision sound was, and they witnessed Ramos exiting the vehicle from the passenger door. As he exits, he's carrying two semi automatic rifles, and he takes one of those rifles and he starts shooting at the men who are standing outside the funeral home. Well, thankfully, these guys duck for cover. They make it back into the safe confines of the building and they call 911. Now, while Ramos is focused and shooting at the men outside that funeral home, the school teacher is witnessing the accident and the shooting that's going on, and she rushes back into the school. Now, she was taking a lot of heat in the media, and this is why it's so important that we allow these things to kind of roll out and more information to get out before we start shouting out what we believe happened or didn't happen. A lot of people were blaming that school teacher for leaving that door open. In reality, and backed up by CCTV footage, the school teacher rushed back into the school upon hearing the accident and the gunshots and grabbed her phone and dialed 911 at 11:30. That's 2 minutes after that car or truck crashes into the ditch. Now, in her haste, she pulled that open door closed behind her, but it didn't fully latch. Now, hearing all the chatter on the police radio, the school resource district officer who's assigned to Robb Elementary School hears what's going down there, and he returns to the school. And he is coming, I would assume, as fast as he possibly can. Now, there are kind of differing reports of whether he witnessed someone out front or not. The more I'm learning, it sounds like what he actually saw was an adult running from the school, and he pursued that adult thinking it was the shooter. All the while, Ramos sees the officer coming, crouches down near the school, preparing to engage the officer, who simply drives by. Now, I'm not condemning the officer for driving by in any way. I can't even begin to guess how many burglars or armed robbers or assailants that I must have driven by when I was responding to these emergency events as a police officer. It just happens, and in this case, uh, it it was just an artifact of what was going on. Now, I'm wondering if Ramos was injured in the accident to a point he was disoriented, because what he does is kind of interesting. He leaves one of the rifles. Remember, he had two semi automatic rifles, AR 15 assault type rifles, and he leaves one of those sitting on the ground next to the passenger door of his wrecked vehicle. There's also a report that he leaves ammunition there. But with one semi automatic rifle in hand, this killer makes his way across the open field and toward the school. And when he reaches the school, he starts shooting rounds into the school building. Now, police, it was later reported, recovered around 22 spent shell casings outside of the school that have been identified to Ramos. Ramos wanders around the front, apparently trying to find a way into the school, and he drops a bag with a large amount of ammunition near the front of the school before making his way through that unsecured door that the teacher mistakenly thought she had closed behind her. And with that, the shooter enters the school at 11:33 a.m. and makes his way to the classrooms number 111 and 112. Reports are that he fired more than 100 rounds in those initial minutes inside the rooms, and there he began this carnage of killing the children and their two teachers. Police would arrive 3 minutes later at 11:35 a.m. And upon approaching the shooter's location, they are fired upon, grazing them both. Now, I don't know what grazing means. I don't know how serious those injuries were or what that meant. Was it an actual bullet? Was it debris from hitting a door jamb next to him? I just don't know. But 16 rounds are fired in that little 2 minute period of time. And the officers retreat, take cover, and call for backup. Now, here's where things start really getting troubling. Well, it would take another 16 minutes before a supervisor or any other officers arrive. And by 12:03 p.m., uh, emergency dispatchers are receiving calls from the children inside the school. And as many as 19 officers then pile in and stage in the hallways where Ramos is barricaded inside that room with these hostage victims. Now, I don't know what the conversations were between the incident commanders and the police officers in the field, but we do know that they waited. Now, at 12:10 p.m., just 40 minutes after this thing begins, a group of U.S. Marshals arrived to assist local police. They drove over 70 miles in order to provide this support. And 5 minutes after that, a Border Patrol tactical team arrives with their ballistic shields. Now, 3 shots are heard while hostage children inside these classrooms are making 911 calls. At one point, there's a report that police say, "Yell out if you need help," and a child does so and is executed. At 12:50 p.m., officers finally open the doors with a key from a school employee. They enter the classroom and they kill Ramos. The hostage situation is over. You know, there is so much that we don't know about this incident. We don't know what evidence the school district police chief relied on when he made that decision to hold his officers back. But this thing we do know. According to CNN, Uvalde School District Police hosted an active shooter training event in March of 2021. That's just a few months ago. The training focused on the response, first aid, and evacuation in school shooter situations, including role playing. Well, this time it was for real. And never was the training and materials more applicable than it was on May 24th. I want to share with you in part some of that training material that was used. Again, this is coming from that news article. It said, quote, "Time is the number one enemy during an active shooter response. The best hope that innocent victims have is that officers immediately move into action to isolate, distract, or neutralize the threat, even if that means one officer acting alone." Now, this is the question that's on everybody's mind in this particular case. Why did law enforcement wait for nearly 80 minutes to rescue these children? I found another quote from the Uvalde active shooter training class that was held to be absolutely deafening, if not damning. It read, "A first responder, unwilling to place the lives of innocent above their own safety, should consider another career field." Now, I don't know if this is helpful for you or not, but I went back and I grabbed some data from the mass shootings. These are shootings where 4 people or more have either been killed or injured, 4 total, in events across the United States since 2018. You're going to notice on this map that there's a down the right-hand side a chart that shows those numbers. At the bottom are those October through December numbers from 2018. Then 2019, the total year, 2020, the total year, 2021, the total year, and then January through the end of May in this year of 2022. The map is stunning to look at when you think of the complexity. Now, this includes single events and mass shooting events like a school shooting, but the numbers are horrendous. And if you watched our video last night of the live, FBI retired agent Mark Safrick talked about the fact that for 23 years, we've been trying to crack this nut and figure out what we can do to make our schools safer. How many of these are going to go on? Now, spend a little time looking at this map and spend some time drilling in and looking at these individually. Across the bottom, you'll see you can pick them by year. You can click on the year 2020 and see just those events happening in 2020. Or you can see 2021. Down the left-hand side, you can see a list of every single mass shooting event that's happened in that amount of time. Again, it is overwhelming to look at. But this is a problem that is not going away, and we have to do more. The link to this map is going to be down below, and I hope you'll share it with your friends. This is serious business. As we reflect on this tragedy, I hope you'll also consider that this wasn't a complete failure of law enforcement. Yes, there were failures, but this doesn't ride solely on law enforcement's back. It became their problem to pick up the pieces of this person's shattered life when he posed a threat to those innocent children and teachers. Yeah, they could have and should have done more to immediately eliminate the threat. But you know what? We all play a part in making our communities safer places. The responsibility lays at the feet of all of us. I mean, think of the feet of the family who knew this kid was troubled. Friends who knew this kid was troubled, coworkers who knew this kid was troubled. I suspect educators who knew this kid was troubled. Might be medical, mental, or even faith professionals who knew this kid was troubled. As we learn more about Ramos and how he projected his homicidal tendencies, we're going to see that he had been acting out these fantasies for some time, preparing for this day. So here's my question for you. What are your thoughts on this case, folks? I'm going to be looking for your comments down below, and I hope that you'll take time to react to each other's comments. I hope you'll consider visiting our website at profilingevil.com and register for our free newsletter, the B.O.L.O. And if you would, click on that like and subscribe button and ring the bell so that you get all of our notifications on videos like this one. And for those of you who are in a position to do so, please consider our channel memberships. My favorite, it's the academy level where we really dig in to these behavioral aspects. And from all of us at Profiling Evil, thanks for your support. I'm sitting right now in San Francisco. I've been meeting with police chiefs from across the country, and Uvalde was a primary discussion point. This thing is on the mind of every police commander across the country. This is a case that we should be thinking of, working toward resolution, and for these families that have been impacted so negatively that we should be praying for. Thanks for your support of Profiling Evil, and we'll see you all soon at the next crime scene.